And so a prize came out of sort of thinking. And it took us 18 months to 2 years to design the prize. We went through a number of other iterations where we were kind of like, do we go this way? Do we go that way? And eventually we settled on the prize.
They thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. Prince William has just made the most shocking power move in modern royal history, and the truth he uncovered about the woman sleeping beside his dying father will leave you speechless. Millions stolen, documents forged, a conspiracy running straight through the heart of the British crown, and one man who decided enough was enough. What happened behind those palace doors is something the royal family never wanted the world to know.
Including 11 from Samoa and over 200 from Australia, 2 places that my husband and I were lucky enough to visit last month.
Christmas at Sandringham is one of the most enduring traditions in the British royal calendar. Every year, the estate in Norfolk becomes the gathering point for the royal family during the festive period, a setting that has hosted generations of monarchs and their closest relatives through decades of history. The rituals are familiar, the expectations clear. There is a certain choreography to it all, carefully maintained across the years, and for those who attend, the occasion carries a weight that goes far beyond a simple family lunch. It is a public statement dressed up as a private moment, a signal to the nation that the institution is intact, united, and at peace with itself. But Christmas traditions, however deeply rooted, do not make a room honest. And on this particular occasion, the carefully arranged setting at Sandringham concealed a tension that had been building for months, perhaps longer. The fine china, the roasted turkey, the seasonal decorations, all of it served as a backdrop to something that had very little to do with celebration. Prince William was present at that table, and by most accounts, he was not there simply to mark the occasion. Those who have reported on the inner workings of the royal household describe a man who had, in the preceding months, been operating with a level of focus and deliberate purpose that went beyond his public-facing role. The warmth of a family Christmas, the pleasantries exchanged over a well-laid table, these were not what occupied his attention that afternoon. He was watching, listening, taking note of every interaction in the room with a degree of attention that no festive gathering should ever require. Camilla's children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, were present. The two have maintained a consistent presence in royal circles since their mother's marriage to King Charles in 2005, and over the years they have appeared regularly at royal events, their proximity to the crown becoming by degrees something that felt ordinary to those within those walls. On this particular afternoon, reports suggest they carried themselves with the ease of people who had no reason to feel uncomfortable, moving through conversation about estates, wine, and the general business of their lives with a confidence that, to at least one person in the room, read as something closer to entitlement. King Charles, meanwhile, presented a picture that troubled those paying close attention. His health had been a matter of public record since January 2024, when Buckingham Palace confirmed he had been diagnosed with cancer. The treatment that followed had been ongoing, and the physical toll of both the illness and the therapy had become visible over time. At the Christmas table, he appeared fatigued in a way that sources described as deeper than the tiredness of the season. It was the kind of exhaustion that speaks to something sustained and serious, the look of a man carrying a weight he has not been able to set down for a very long time. Camilla, seated nearby, maintained the composure she has long been known for in public settings. But composure, when observed carefully enough, has its own tells. William, by the accounts that would emerge later, missed very little. The meal progressed. Courses were served and cleared. Conversation moved in the way that conversation does at formal occasions, touching surfaces without settling on anything too uncomfortable, filling the room with the pleasant noise of people performing. Normality. And then, as the main course was taken away and the table was briefly quiet, something shifted. William reached for his water glass and set it down. The sound it made, a single, deliberate clink against the table, was not loud. In a different context, it would have meant nothing at all, but those present described it as carrying a kind of weight that a louder sound might not have. There was an intentionality to it that registered before anyone could quite explain why. Within seconds, the doors to the dining room opened. It was not the dessert being brought in. Security officers entered the room, moving with the controlled, unhurried precision of people who know exactly what they are there to do and have no need to rush. Their expressions gave nothing away. The purpose of their presence did not need to be announced. Conversation stopped. The room, which had been full of the comfortable noise of a family occasion, went very still. William stood. He moved to the table and placed a blue folder in front of the assembled guests. The sound it made as it landed, though soft, seemed to carry more weight than anything that had been said over the preceding hours. Inside that folder, according to sources familiar with the investigation that preceded this moment, was the product of months of careful, methodical work. Financial audit reports, bank statements, company registration documents, invoices. A paper trail documenting the movement of large sums of money through accounts connected to the royal household, money that had been redirected in ways that were not authorized and not above board. The reaction in the room was immediate. Tom Parker Bowles, whose name appeared throughout the documentation, reportedly lost color. He protested, called the whole episode an insult, and turned toward his mother as though she might intervene on his behalf. His sister Laura sat without moving. The stillness of someone who understands that movement, any movement, might make things worse. Camilla gripped the fabric of her napkin. She said nothing. King Charles looked down at the pages in front of him. Those who were present described his expression shifting, moving through confusion before arriving somewhere harder and quieter. The look, according to one account, was recognition. The numbers in those documents did not leave room for interpretation or dispute. They were what they were. What followed was not a confrontation in the dramatic sense. William's voice, when he spoke, was described as even, controlled, the kind of quiet that comes not from hesitation, but from absolute certainty. He outlined what the documents showed. He explained what would happen next. Contracts connected to the front companies identified in the audit were terminated with immediate effect. State auditors would begin the process of recovering the funds that had been taken. Access to royal properties and royal finances was revoked. There was no process of appeal being offered, no negotiation on the table. The matter had been decided before anyone sat down to lunch. Security officers stepped forward and guided Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes from their seats. They were taken from the dining room and moved through the estate, not through the main entrance that dignitaries and members of the royal family use, but through the service corridors that run behind the public-facing parts of the building and out through the rear. The door used by delivery drivers and household staff. They were placed into a standard security vehicle. The vehicle left the estate. William watched from the window as it went. What those present noticed, and what has been reported by people familiar with the account, was that his expression was entirely composed. He understood clearly that what he had just done would be seen by some as ruthless. He had calculated that. Because the point being made in that dining room was not directed solely at the two people being escorted out. It was directed at everyone who had watched from within those walls and stayed quiet. Every member of staff who had not asked questions they should have asked. Every official who had found reasons to look the other way. The signal being sent was straightforward. The circumstances that had allowed certain behaviours to continue inside the royal household were finished. The people who benefited from those circumstances, regardless of who they were or who they were connected to, would no longer be protected by proximity to the crown. But the question that hung over everything that afternoon, the question that nobody in that room asked aloud, was a practical one. How has this been possible? Prince William was not yet king. He was Prince of Wales. What gave him the legal standing to walk into a Christmas lunch, remove the Queen's children from royal privileges, and act against his father's own household? The answer to that question had nothing to do with what happened at the dining table. It had everything to do with what had taken place 48 hours earlier, in a meeting that appeared on no official schedule and no palace press release. 2 days before Christmas, a meeting took place that would not appear in any court circular, any official diary, or any communication released to the press. The location was St. James's Palace, and the room chosen for the meeting had been selected with a specific purpose in mind. It was a secure conference room, insulated from electronic surveillance by walls of thick Tudor-era stone that, as one account put it, blocked signals and secrets in equal measure. The atmosphere inside was described by those with knowledge of what took place as having far more in common with a military briefing than with any kind of ceremonial royal transition. Seated across from William were the Lord Chief Justice and the Home Secretary. What was being discussed was not a routine administrative matter. It was the formal, legal transfer of regency powers from King Charles to his son, and the circumstances surrounding it were anything but ordinary. The official version of events, carefully worded and released to the press in the days that followed, described the transfer as voluntary and cooperative. King Charles, it was stated, was facing ongoing health challenges and had chosen to temporarily grant regency powers to William in the interest of continuity and stability. The language used was measured and reassuring, the kind of phrasing designed to settle rather than unsettle. But those familiar with the detail of what actually took place behind that official statement have described a reality that was considerably more specific in its purpose. William was not stepping in as a caretaker in the general sense. He was taking operational control of the crown for a defined reason. He had concluded, on the basis of months of careful observation and the early stages of a financial investigation, that there was a deeply damaging influence operating at the heart of the royal household, one that had been allowed to continue and grow because the man at the center of the institution was too unwell, too trusting, and too close to the situation to recognize the full extent of what was happening around him. At 9:47 in the evening, King Charles signed the transfer documents. His signature, according to people with direct knowledge of the moment, was unsteady but deliberate. It was the signature of a man who understood the significance of what he was putting his name to, even if the complete picture of what his son had uncovered was not yet fully in front of him. By 10:15, William had already begun to act. His first move was to summon two of the most senior figures in the palace's operational structure to a midnight meeting at Clarence House. The Director General of MI5 and the Keeper of the Privy Purse, the official whose office carries responsibility for managing the monarch's finances, were both called in. What they walked into was not a welcoming briefing. William informed them directly that their offices had been compromised by influences operating in the interests of the Queen's household. He stopped short of making personal accusations against either of them individually, but the message about their cooperation was unambiguous. It was not optional. The Keeper of the Privy Purse, a figure with 3 decades of royal service behind him, raised the matter of protocol. There were procedures in place, long-established rules governing how these things were done, systems that had been built up over years and were not designed to be set aside quickly. William's response was brief and left no room for discussion. Those protocols, he told him, had allowed millions of pounds to be taken that could no longer be tolerated or defended. By 2 in the morning, both positions had new occupants. William had spent the preceding months quietly identifying replacements from entirely outside the palace's existing ecosystem. People he brought in were not career courtiers or long-serving palace officials. They were financial forensics specialists and counterintelligence professionals, individuals whose professional loyalties were to institutional integrity rather than to the personalities and internal politics of the household they were entering. What came next was access to something that insiders would later refer to as the black box. Not a physical object in the aviation sense, but a secure digital archive containing decades of financial transactions, security reports, personnel files, and classified correspondence. The system had been designed so that access was restricted to the monarch and consort alone. That exclusivity, which was intended as a safeguard, had in practice created a significant blind spot, one that, according to the investigation's findings, had been exploited with a degree of efficiency that spoke to careful planning over a sustained period of time. At 3:30 in the morning, William ran his first search query through the archive. He was looking for all contracts and payments linked to the Parker Bowles family across a 5-year window. What came back confirmed the concerns that had been driving his investigation for months, and then it went further than even he had anticipated. What the archive revealed was not the kind of opportunistic, disorganized financial misconduct that tends to emerge from individuals simply taking advantage of a situation that presents itself. The picture that began to take shape was something far more structured. Royal funds had been quietly redirected through budget lines that on the surface looked entirely routine. Logistics, estate maintenance, diplomatic receptions, charitable events. Each individual entry was plausible on its own. Each one was the kind of expenditure that a large, complex institution like the royal household generates regularly, and that no one would look at twice without a specific reason to do so. But the poor patterns, when examined across 5 years rather than line by line, told a completely different story. payments had been systematically rerouted. Smaller sums in some instances, significantly larger transfers in others, each designed to appear legitimate when reviewed at the surface level, while quietly accumulating in accounts that were structured specifically to avoid detection. At the center of this network were Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes. The investigation's findings, according to sources familiar with the detail, indicated that their role was not passive. They were not simply beneficiaries who had received money without understanding where it came from. They controlled a network of offshore trusts registered across multiple jurisdictions, including the Isle of Man, Jersey, and the British Virgin Islands. Each of these trusts was connected to shell companies that held actual contracts with the palace. Every invoice, every transfer, every document in the chain carried a signature or a registration that linked back through layers of corporate structure to those two individuals. The specifics of what those contracts involved made the scale of the operation clear. Tom Parker Bowles' network held the palace's premium food supply contracts. Scottish salmon was being billed at 3 times the market rate. Wine was invoiced at 4 times its actual cost. Flowers for events were charged at multiples that bore no relation to what the events in question required or what the market would support. Laura Lopes had invoiced tens of thousands of pounds for media advice that, when traced back to its substance, amounted to the equivalent of a single email exchange. Hundreds of thousands of pounds had been charged for crisis consultancy work during periods when no crisis had occurred and no documented consultancy had taken place. The most significant category in financial terms was listed under special event production and coordination. When the investigation cross-referenced invoices in this category with court circulars, official schedules, and photographic records, the findings were stark. A considerable number of the events being invoiced for had never taken place. Others had occurred, but on a scale that represented a fraction of what was being charged. Across 5 years, the total sum flowing through accounts controlled by Camilla's children, routed through the Queen's office before reaching the keeper of the Privy Purse, came to approximately £45 million. William now had a detailed picture of what had been taken and a clear understanding of how the money had moved. The financial architecture of the operation was documented, traceable, and substantial. But the question that the evidence had not yet fully answered was the most consequential one of all. Was Camilla's involvement that of someone who had failed to notice what her children were doing, or was she the person who had designed and directed the entire arrangement? That question was still open, and the answer, when it came, would arrive through something small and easy to overlook: a purple mark, a seal, applied to document after document at the precise moments when the king was at his most medically vulnerable, and noticed finally by a forensic analyst working through the night in a windowless room at Kensington Palace with no phone and no connection to the outside world, looking for a smoking gun and finding something considerably worse. The team William had assembled at Kensington Palace was not drawn from the usual pool of palace administrators or royal household staff. These were people who had spent their careers working on financial investigations of a kind that most institutions never have to face. One lead analyst had previously been involved in unraveling a £2 billion Russian money laundering network. Another had worked across multiple jurisdictions tracking the movement of funds through corporate structures designed by people who understood exactly how difficult they were making things for anyone trying to follow the trail. They worked in a room with no windows, no internet connection, and no phones. Their instructions were straightforward, and the urgency behind them was not understated. Find the smoking gun. What they found was considerably more serious than that. The focus of their attention shifted to a specific reserve pool within the royal finances, a fund set aside for royal emergencies that sat outside the normal oversight structures applied to the household's day-to-day accounts. Royal regulations going back to the reign of George V had established a dual approval requirement for any withdrawal from this fund. 2 signatures were required: the keeper of the Privy Purse and the monarch himself. The logic behind that requirement was simple and sound: a safeguard against exactly the kind of abuse that was now being investigated. A single point of authorization was too vulnerable, too independent. Approvals made the system harder to exploit. Over a 5-year period, there had been 237 transactions drawn from this fund. The total came to £87 million. The lead analyst began working through the King's signatures on those authorizations, running them through analysis software and comparing them against verified examples from different periods of Charles's reign. A healthy individual's signature, examined across multiple samples, would typically score between 95 and 98% for consistency in letter formation and motor control. The results that came back from the largest authorizations, amounts ranging from £500,000 to £3 million per transaction, were devastating. Confidence scores on those documents fell between 40 and 70%. These were not the signatures of a man who was simply tired or distracted. They were produced by someone whose hand was shaking, whose motor control was severely compromised, someone signing under the influence of heavy medication or in a state of extreme physical fatigue. When those signatures were cross-referenced with King Charles's medical schedule, the picture moved from troubling to something that functioned as a verdict in its own right. The largest fraudulent authorizations corresponded with chemotherapy treatment dates and post-operative recovery periods. These were the windows in which anti-nausea medications and painkillers would reduce cognitive clarity, slow processing, and diminish a person's capacity to examine detail carefully before committing to a decision. Someone had access to his medical schedule, and someone had used that access to time the presentation of documents around the moments when he was least equipped to scrutinize what he was being asked to sign. The technique used to get those documents in front of him was also identified. High-value requests had been concealed within stacks of mundane paperwork. Ceremonial proclamations, diplomatic letters, military commissions, charitable approvals, all bundled together so that the documents that mattered were invisible within a pile designed to look routine. Staff operating within Camilla's office would apply gentle, consistent pressure. The signing needed to happen today, perhaps quickly so he could rest. Charles, who trusted the people around him and had no reason at that point to question the arrangement, would move through the stack rapidly, giving each page only seconds of attention. Then came the seal. Every special fund request passed through the Queen's office for what was described as administrative review before reaching Charles. That process involved the application of a small purple insignia, Camilla's personal seal. The mark confirmed that the document had been reviewed by her office and approved for the King's signature. On every single fraudulent authorization in the archive beneath Charles's unsteady signature, that purple seal was present. Applied consistently, 24 to 48 hours before the documents reached him, every time without exception. This was not a clerical error. It was not a case of paperwork moving through a system without anyone paying attention. Someone had reviewed each of those requests and knowingly facilitated their passage to a king who, on the dates in question, did not have the physical or cognitive capacity to properly assess what he was authorizing. The implications of that finding extended well beyond financial misconduct. What the documentation described, taken as a whole, was a pattern of conduct directed at a seriously ill man who had placed his complete trust in the people managing his affairs. The word that the investigation's legal advisors used when assessing it was deliberate. The word that others reached for was elder abuse. William needed the original physical documents. Digital evidence carries weight, but it is also arguable. It can be contested, questioned, and challenged by lawyers with the time and resources to do so. Physical documents bearing Charles's deteriorating signature alongside Camilla's purple seal were something else entirely. They were definitive, but they were also vulnerable. If Camilla understood how close the investigation was getting to those originals, and if she had both the motivation and the means to act, those papers could be made to disappear. A fire in a records room, a plumbing incident, a filing error of the kind that conveniently destroys decades of material. William moved carefully, and he moved with a specific plan in mind. He identified a woman named Margaret Thornton, an administrative assistant working within the Privy Purse office. She had been personally recommended for the position by Camilla some years earlier, and her loyalty to the Queen was genuine and long-standing. She was not, by the investigation's assessment, corrupt in the straightforward sense. She believed sincerely that Camilla was a woman who had been treated unfairly by history and by sections of the press, and that loyalty shaped how she moved through her working life. It also made her entirely predictable. William's investigators arranged for Margaret to overhear a staged conversation between auditors. The substance of what she heard was carefully constructed. The money trail had been fully traced. The original signed documents were the final piece of the case. Once they were retrieved and secured, the matter would be airtight. Margaret heard every word. Within 6 hours, the information had reached Camilla. She was taking tea at Clarence House when the warning came through what remained of her internal network. She dismissed her staff and spent the following 2 hours working through her options. The digital evidence William had assembled was substantial, but it was the physical documents that represented the point of no return. If those papers survived, everything would collapse. She made her decision. She retrieved a disposable phone she kept for sensitive communications and called Ali Hassan, her chief close protection officer of 15 years. Hassan had been beside her through the most difficult periods of her public life. He had checked vehicles for explosives, managed her security through hostile press environments, and carried confidences that could not be trusted to anyone else. His loyalty had been tested repeatedly over those 15 years and had not wavered. Until now. Camilla explained what needed to happen. Safe number 4 in Archive B, the original authorizations. They had to be destroyed. Hassan understood immediately that what he was being asked to do had nothing to do with protection work. This was the destruction of evidence and potentially the obstruction of a royal investigation. At 1:45 in the morning, he entered Buckingham Palace through a staff entrance. He was dressed in standard night security clothing, and his credentials gave him access to most non-public areas of the building. He was carrying a flashlight, a laser cutting device, and an incendiary device intended for final destruction of the materials. He moved through corridors he knew intimately, navigating around patrol routes and camera positions, making his way toward the archive room in the oldest and most complex wing of the palace. He arrived at 2 in the morning. His clearance level opened the keypad on the archive room door. Inside, the only light came from emergency strip lighting along the floor. Rows of reinforced storage cabinets ran back into the darkness. Safe number 4 stood against the far wall. He activated the laser cutter and worked slowly, keeping the noise to a minimum. 15 minutes passed before the internal mechanism gave way and the door opened. Inside was a red portfolio containing 40 pages of original special fund authorizations. Charles's signature was on every one of them, shaking and uncertain, the signature of a man who had not known what he was approving. And beneath each signature, the purple seal. Hassan raised the lighter. The room is filled with white light. High-intensity floodlights came on from multiple positions simultaneously. Footsteps converged from every direction. The voice of Lieutenant Colonel Thompson cut through the sudden brightness with absolute clarity. The file stays. Hands on your head. 5 armed Royalty Protection Group officers had been waiting. The tactical team had been in position before Hassan entered the building. He was surrounded, outnumbered, and out of options. He raised his hands. The lighter was removed. The red portfolio was carefully collected and secured. Thompson informed him of the charges he was facing: attempted destruction of Crown property, unauthorized access to restricted areas, conspiracy to obstruct a royal investigation, and because he had entered the building armed, potential terrorism-related offences. Then came the final detail. The disposable phone Camilla had used to give her instructions had been monitored by GCHQ for the preceding 3 days. Every word of the order she had given to destroy the documents had been recorded. She had, in her own voice, provided the clearest possible evidence of her own involvement. Ali Hassan was taken to a secure facility that did not appear on any official record. The room contained a metal table, 3 chairs, and cameras positioned at every angle. The walls were soundproofed. Under emergency provisions of the Official Secrets Act and Royal Security Protocol, no legal representation was present. Across the table from Hassan sat Prince William and Lord Justice Peyton, the senior legal advisor attached to the investigation. William was not there purely to gather testimony for a legal case. He wanted to understand something that the documents alone could not answer. Why would a man of Hassan's experience and professional discipline, someone who had spent 15 years building a reputation for loyalty and discretion in one of the most demanding protection roles in the country, agree to cross a line of this magnitude? What had been said to him that made the destruction of evidence feel like a reasonable decision? The interrogation began with the recording. Camilla's voice captured clearly by GCHQ over the preceding 3 days, giving the instruction to destroy the materials in Archive B, safe number 4. Hassan listened without visible reaction, but William noted the small physical tells of a man working hard to maintain composure. His jaw tightened. his breathing shifted into the controlled, deliberate pattern of someone managing a significant internal response. William laid out the legal position in full and without softening. The charges Hassan was facing carried a minimum of 20 years. Trespassing in restricted areas, attempted destruction of national property, endangering a heritage building, conspiracy to obstruct a royal investigation, potential terrorism-related offences given that he had entered the building armed. Beyond the prison sentence, the consequences would extend to his family. Pensions gone, housing support gone, educational provision for his children is gone. 30 years of dedicated, decorated service reduced to nothing in a single night. Then William set out the alternative: full cooperation, witness protection arrangements, a significant reduction in sentencing, security and financial stability for his family. In exchange, complete testimony covering the full scope of the conspiracy, the financial architecture behind it, and specifically the nature and extent of Camilla's involvement. Hassan sat in silence for a considerable period. When he finally spoke, it was with the measured clarity of someone who had already arrived at his decision before sitting down. He said that the loyalty he had believed was a matter of honor had become something criminal. Camilla had not asked him to protect someone who was in genuine danger. She had asked him to commit a serious offense in order to conceal the systematic financial exploitation of a dying man. That distinction, he said, changed everything. For 6 hours, Hassan's testimony dismantled what remained of the conspiracy's internal structure. What he described was not opportunistic or loosely organized. It was a deliberate, long-running financial operation, and it had a name. Camilla had referred to it among her closest circle as the Post-Charles Safety Fund. The stated objective was to secure a minimum of £100 million in independent assets before Charles died. The reasoning she had offered to those aware of the plan was framed around self-preservation. She was concerned about the transition of power, about the possible reduction of her position and influence once Charles was gone, about the end of her life and the standing she had spent decades building. The fund was her architecture for surviving what came after. She had used her children as the primary instruments of the operation, channeling royal contracts through their shell companies and routing the resulting funds into trusts held in their names across multiple offshore jurisdictions. She had obtained Charles's medical schedule under the stated pretext of coordinating her own diary and public commitments. She had used that schedule to identify the specific windows following chemotherapy sessions, surgeries, and periods of heavy medication when he was most compliant, most trusting, and least capable of examining what was being placed in front of him for signature. She had framed the fraudulent transfers as charitable donations, conservation initiatives, and cultural investments, presenting them in documents that, on their surface, read like the considered, philanthropic decisions of a king who cared deeply about the legacy he would leave behind. Hassan confirmed that throughout the entire period he had been aware of the operation. Camilla had not expressed remorse about any aspect of it. Her anxiety was never about what was being done to Charles. It was about the risk of being discovered. She spoke about the efficiency of the arrangement, the security of the structure, and the importance of maintaining the appearance of routine. She treated the exploitation of her husband's illness as a matter to be managed carefully, not as something that required moral consideration. William listened to every word of it, and somewhere in the course of that 6-hour session, something shifted in him that was separate from the legal and institutional dimensions of what he was hearing. His father had loved this woman through decades of public hostility. He had defended her against members of his own family. He had elevated her to the highest constitutional position available to a woman in the British system, knowing what it had cost him to do so. And she had looked at the illness that was slowly taking his life and identified in it not something that called for care and loyalty, but a series of opportunities to be used while they lasted. The evidence was complete, but the most difficult thing William had to do still lay ahead. He drove himself to his father's private residence early the following morning. He arrived at 9 carrying a leather briefcase. Charles was in his private study, surrounded by photographs and personal effects accumulated over a lifetime of public service. The cancer had made its mark visibly. His frame had thinned. The composure he still carried seemed, for the first time to those who knew him well, fragile rather than settled. Camilla was in the room when William arrived. She saw his expression and understood immediately that what was coming could not be redirected or managed. He was not there as a stepson. He was there as the regent. William laid the documents out in sequence. The financial audits first, the charts mapping the movement of money from royal accounts through shell companies into Parker Bowles family trusts. Then the original, special fund authorizations, each one carrying Charles's unsteady signature and Camilla's purple seal. He explained the scale, £87 million across 5 years. Ghost invoices, fraudulent contracts. Tom and Laura as the ultimate beneficiaries, their ownership concealed through layers of corporate structure built specifically to resist discovery. He handed Charles a single document, a conservation payment of £2.88 million that had moved through a Jersey shell company before arriving in a family trust. Charles's hands shook as he held it. He could not remember signing it. William continued pairing each authorization with the corresponding medical records. 43 high-value transactions, every single one executed during a period of medical vulnerability. Someone with access to his schedule had timed each one with precision. Then he pointed to the seal. He explained what its consistent presence on every fraudulent document meant. This was not a staff error. This was not an administrative oversight. This was active and deliberate facilitation. Someone had reviewed and approved each of these documents before sending them to a man who did not have the capacity to scrutinize what he was being asked to authorize. Charles stared at the purple seal for a long time. His whole body was shaking. The woman he had trusted more than anyone. The one he had stood beside through everything the public and the press had thrown at them. She had looked at the windows his illness had created and seen them not as moments requiring extra protection and care, but as moments to be used. The final piece was the recording. Hassan's voice, steady and detailed, described how the medical schedule had been obtained and used, how the documents had been framed as charitable works, how the operation had been structured and maintained, and the goal that had driven all of it. £100 million, the post-Charles Safety Fund. When the recording ended, the room was silent. Then Charles asked very quietly, why? He had given her everything that was his to give. Love, protection, public defense, a title that history would have denied her. He had married her knowing what it would cost and had stood by that decision through years of criticism. And she had taken the illness that was ending his life and made it work for her. The tears that followed were not from anger. They were in grief. The particular and devastating kind that arrives when a person understands that the most intimate years of their life were built on something that was never entirely what it appeared to be. Camilla attempted to speak. Each time she started, the weight of what was documented on the table in front of her made the words collapse before they could form into anything coherent. She tried to redirect blame toward William, suggesting that his long-standing feelings about his mother's memory had driven him to destroy her. She tried to frame the money as a reasonable response to financial uncertainty. William addressed both directly. Her fear of an uncertain future had cost her the one thing of genuine and irreplaceable value. She had held Charles's complete trust. She had spent it. Charles eventually nodded when William asked whether he wanted the process of accountability to continue. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible. It was also, by any measure, one of the hardest things he had ever done. He was giving his son permission to dismantle what remained of a love that had defined the final chapter of his life. Because the alternative was to allow something corrupt to continue sitting at the heart of the institution he had spent everything protecting. Shortly afterward, William stood before Camilla and read from a sealed legal order, countersigned by the Lord Chief Justice. The terms were not open to discussion. She would leave the estate within 15 minutes. She would relocate to a remote property in the Scottish Highlands. Her access to public funds would be limited to a closely monitored stipend. She would retain the title of Queen Consort in name alone, permanently removed from all public appearances, royal events, and ceremonial duties. There would be no contact with Charles, no visits, no letters, no phone calls. All future communication would pass through legal channels exclusively. Her children's access to anything connected to the crown would be limited and supervised, conditional on their full cooperation with the process of financial restitution. She raised the matter of her legal rights as queen. She cited decades of service. William did not raise his voice. He described the alternative: full criminal prosecution for fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse, public trials for her children, a global scandal of a scale and nature that would follow the family name indefinitely. She went quiet. Charles offered nothing. He sat looking toward the window, turned away from her, giving her nothing of whatever remained. Inside him, Camilla said a single word: acceptance. 2 officers guided her out of the room. She could take only the clothes she was wearing. Everything else would be inventoried. What was not considered personally sentimental would be directed toward restitution. Each step she took across that floor was a step further from the life she had built across 3 decades, past corridors she had walked as queen, through doors that had once opened for her as the most senior woman in the household, and into a car that carried no royal insignia and offered nothing of what she was leaving behind. William watched the vehicle disappear behind the old oaks lining the estate road. Then he turned back to his father. Charles was still seated, looking out at the grey morning, something moving across his face that carried both relief and devastation simultaneously. The complicated emotional state of someone who has just been freed from something that was also the centre of their world. William placed a hand on his father's shoulder. He told him quietly that he had been betrayed, but that he was now protected. Kate arrived shortly after and took Charles's hand, telling him simply that he would be cared for properly now by people who valued him as a person rather than as a position. Charles, exhausted and emotionally raw, managed a small and broken smile. As William and Kate left, William paused at the door and looked back at the window where his father still sat. He felt the full weight of everything that had just taken place, the corruption removed, the damage it had caused, and the long and uncertain work that stretched out ahead. Kate took his hand. Neither of them spoke. The estate fell away behind them as they drove, the past left sitting in the grey morning light and the future still unwritten.